Hello, and welcome to Leadership Trail Mix. I'm Miguel Oliveira, and for the next 5 to 10 minutes, we'll be together, looking at one of the main ingredients that compose this art and science we call people leadership. First episode of 2025, and we have a guest. By the way, I think it's worth noting that as we move forward, I plan to have more guests here at Leadership Trail Mix. The goal is to amplify voices that are inspiring me by letting them share their own message instead of me sharing my interpretation of it. No, you're not getting rid of me. My own reflections on things I'm hearing, reading, and living will still be the main content on this podcast. Think about this new approach as the introduction of a new flavor to our trail mix. How about that? And talking about introductions, let me introduce my first guest in 2025. I'm so excited, folks. Today I'll be talking to Mimi Nicklin, an experienced CEO, global best-selling author, podcaster, and empathy advocate. Mimi specialized in organizational empathy, listening-led leadership, psychological safety, multi-generational leadership, and diversity and inclusion. A truly global leader, she has recently been awarded Malaysian Female Leader 2024 and Top 45 Sri Lankan Leader. Originally from the south of England, today she's talking to us from Dubai, where she currently lives. So if you're wondering how we made it work, well, Mimi's day is about to end. It's around 9 p.m. for her, and mine is starting very early. It's around 6 a.m. here in Colorado. I have to say, I can remember being that excited so early in the morning, Mimi. Welcome to Leadership Trail Mix.
Oh, thank you for having me, Miguel. I am. You said you're excited to start your day, but I'm really excited to end my day. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's jump right in. And my first question to you, Mimi, is I thought we could potentially start with definitions, if that's okay. In a prior episode of Leadership Trail Mix, I talked about singularity and compassion and tried to navigate the difference between pity, sympathy, empathy, and compassion. And the definition I used back then was empathy is I feel with you. As a specialist in the subject, how do you define empathy?
I mean, it's such a good question to start with. And it's a question that I get asked all the time, which is, the definition, exactly as you said, between empathy and sympathy specifically. But for me, and scientifically, really, empathy is about perspective taking. Fundamentally, empathy is the ability to understand the world through the lens of somebody else. And that can be emotions, as you say, I feel with you, but it can also be cognitive, right? So I understand the world as you understand it, or I understand the perspective as you see that perspective. So really, when you look at the difference between something like empathy and sympathy, empathy is a skill set, and that skill set brings us closer together. Sympathy or pity is an emotion. Nothing wrong with an emotion. It's an emotion, and it really creates distance. So you can say to someone, you can buy flowers for someone who's experiencing pain and give them flowers and say, I'm sorry for you. And you mean it, but you're not getting any closer to them. You're like, I'm sorry, I'm walking away. Whereas empathy is saying, I understand with you. I understand, I want to be part of that world with you. And it brings you closer together. So fundamentally, the difference is that empathy is a skill set and sympathy is an emotion.
Oh, I love that. It's different from mine and it's so powerful. Thank you for sharing, Mimi. And one of the things that really impressed me in the work you do is your ability to articulate the business case of empathy. So $9 trillion lost in productive worldwide. Can you please expand on this number and what is inside of it? And maybe add another data point and help us understand why taking action to bring empathy into our workplaces is so important.
I mean, that figure that you're quoting comes from a mixture of Gallup data, who I really respect, the data from Gallup, normalized against some GDP data. And what it's saying is that total estimated cost of us missing out on connection, commitment, engagement in the workplace, up towards that $9 trillion number that you're talking to, which is actually nearly 9% of global GDP. And it is being fueled by a mixture of a few things: disconnection, disengagement, and presenteeism, which fundamentally means people are turning up to their jobs at 9, They're going home at 5. They're doing their jobs. You can't fire them, right? They're doing their job description, but that's all they're doing. That disengagement, that disconnection, that feeling that I don't belong. So fundamentally, when you look at what you need to lead, and of course, there's a million definitions of leadership, but when I think about what leadership means, in its simplest definition, to lead, people have to follow, right? To be a leader, someone has to be coming behind you. That's the definition of the word to lead.
Yep.
And people follow people who resonate with them, people who understand them, people who engage with them. So I talk about listening-led leadership as the future of leadership, because for me, there can be no other leadership.
I agree.
How can you lead if you don't first listen? How can you ever engage people if you don't understand them? So that's why for me, Miguel, empathy is the future of leadership, because I just don't believe that we can lead the next generation or even this generation if we don't first understand them.
Oh gosh, I agree completely. That makes so much sense, Mimi. And the next question kind of builds upon this one. Sometimes I feel like we talk about things that are needed in the workplace, but we don't necessarily help people recognize that in the workplace. So my question is, how can we as leaders promote and as employees recognize empathy in our workplaces?
I mean, as a leader, fundamentally, the first step to embodying or creating any form of empathy is the intention and probably even just the awareness to do so. In the end, empathy is about curiosity. Because if you're trying to understand someone, the only way you can do that is by being curious, by asking questions, by being interested in what it is that drives them. How am I going to motivate you? Why does that motivate you? And why would it sustain your motivation? So from a leader's point of view, the first step is that intention to listen, which is why I so often say to lead, you need to listen. That is the first step. And from an employee point of view, it's more about creating consistency around that. As human beings, we know when there's a fake, right? We know when people are blending. So if you're looking to create more empathy in the culture in your team, and you don't have to be a senior vice president to do that, right? Empathy is a human trait. It's an evolutionary trait. It is a trait that makes us human. It is built into your prefrontal cortex. So the inclination to be empathetic, to listen to those around you, to be interested, to understand, work with is the first step to that. So the first step is awareness. The second is probably intention. And the third is what those lead to, which is fundamentally being a better listener.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Going a little personal here, not only so that we can get to know you better and because I'm curious, but because there's something very inspiring for us to look at here. And that's applicable not only to how we support the people we lead, but also how we lead ourselves and the choices and shifts we make in our lives and careers. For context, in the last episode of Leadership Trail Mix, I shared a story from my hometown, Rio de Janeiro, about the kindness prophet, a businessman who left everything behind and started walking around the city spreading his message of kindness. Really coincidentally, looking at your professional background, I saw that you went from being a marketing executive to becoming the empathy advocate. How did that transition happen, and how do you think your background in marketing supports the work you do through empathy everywhere today?
It's funny because, Miguel, I never intended this shift to happen. I never planned to be a best-selling author or any of these things. This was not like a lifelong dream. It kind of, I often say, I feel like my books wrote me rather than the other way around. But I think there's probably two answers to that. Fundamentally, I believe, as someone who studied marketing and lived marketing for nearly 20 years of my career, that all marketing is founded in empathy. Because similar to leadership, you could ask the question, how can you sell any product to anybody if you don't understand why they want that product or how they're going to consume it or what the role plays in their life, which fundamentally is empathy. So I think probably I was always living my life with empathy. I just hadn't necessarily defined it. But in terms of how did that shift happen, to cut a very long story short, in 2018, I moved to a new country for a new job in a very large American global organization. And when I arrived in that job, let's say to be correct, that the job wasn't quite as I expected it to be. Often happens, right, in the corporate world. And the reality was at the time, we're talking about 2018, I was entirely overwhelmed by the job I had to do. I had come from a very corporate, very large set of people around me, my whole career, 20 people in HR, 15 people in finance. And suddenly I found myself all alone. And in that process, I went to see a business coach. And as I sat with her, she asked me about my leadership style. And I was talking at the time about intuition and being an intuitive people leader. She stopped me and she asked me a question that changed my life. And that question was, is it intuition or is it empathy?
Oh.
And at the time, I remember thinking, it's not empathy. Like, what's empathy got to do with anything? I went away and I began studying empathy, and I discovered something called the empathy deficit, which is the lack of connectivity in our world, which has been expanding and growing for nearly 3 decades now. And we have lost nearly 48% of our empathy. And when you understand that empathy is a human trait, a pro-evolution trait, and that means it keeps us alive, not just thriving, but surviving. I discovered this reality in our business world. And after that, I started to write. I launched my first book, my first podcast, and I don't know, the journey became me after that. And now I live my purpose every day.
I love that, Mimi. Oh, wow. The power of purpose, the power of having a strong why. That's beautiful. Switching gears a little bit here, and I'm going to go down the numbers route. I recently was exposed by Gartner to some survey results that are very interesting. In 2024, only 29% of employees were satisfied with collaboration in their organization. That number is 7% lower than it was in 2021. And the projected results for 2027 is 22%. 22. So less than 1 in every 4 employees will be satisfied with collaboration in their organizations by then. The study also showed when organizations provide collaboration guidance, it leads to 35% higher retention, 37% higher innovation, and 10% higher profitability. Yet, only 33% of organizations provide guidance on collaborating effectively. And why am I talking about that? Because of your new book, The Connection Prescription, which will be released in April 2025. Can you tell us a little bit more about what we can expect from it and what, if anything, it has to do with empathy?
Oh, yes. And Miguel, you're the first person to ask me.
Ooh, what an honor.
Yeah, I'm so excited. The Connection Prescription is my 3rd book, but it will be my first book to launch in the USA because the others have launched on the side of the world where I live, which is in the East. And the Connection Prescription really evolves the conversation around empathy and leadership to the role of longevity. And that's in 3 ways. Longevity in leadership. So some of that data you're looking at there, why it is that, as you said, people stay longer, work longer, feel better, perform higher when right? When they have belonging in those organizations, when they feel that they're leaders and they believe that their colleagues are listening and are interested in them, but also in our relationships and in our physiological health. So why it is quite literally that statistically you will live 8 years longer when you're to those around you. So it was the Secretary General of the USA who said just about a year ago now that chronic loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
I know, right?
I had not heard the number before. That's insane.
Big number. And as he finished his 2nd term with you guys over there in the USA just about a week ago, in his closing statement, and he said, our biggest priority, and he came out and he said, we have work to do, right? Our biggest priority has to be in reconnecting our communities and our people. And of course, he's coming at that from a health point of view. So the Connection Prescription really looks at those 3 areas, why it is that belonging, connecting to others, having empathy in the world, not only helps you live longer, but will also help you, lead longer and have deeper, more consistent, long-lasting relationships. So longevity is not only about, triathlons and multivitamins, but the people that we connect with and the importance of community as well.
That's so true. Mimi, as you can imagine, I could be talking to you for the next few days in a row without stopping, but we are getting to the end of this chat, and all I can say is, wow, I learned so much. And I have two things for us before we close. The first one is, how can people stay in touch with you?
Well, they can find me, I guess, anywhere that you Google my name. So I'm particularly busy and active on LinkedIn, but I'm also on Instagram and Threads and X and all those. And my website is www.empathyeverywhere.co.
That's awesome. And number two, we finish every episode of Leadership Trail Mix with a call to action, something people can start doing immediately to become better people leaders. So, channeling the energy of the new year, what is the one thing you would recommend we start doing today to start closing the empathy gap in our teams?
You know, I have so many things I could say to this, and all of them link back to this belief I have around to lead, you need to first listen. One thing that I would probably say, Miguel, is, and it's so easy, is to use people's names and really ask yourself, how many people today can you ask their name and use their name? Because it makes such a massive difference, particularly with service stuff. So the person in your coffee shop, your Uber driver, somebody that's working somewhere in a building where you are, find out their name, remember their name, and use their name. I think in that small act, we can probably change lives.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Mimi. Mimi Nicklin, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that's all for today. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or just want to say hi, send me an email, miguel@leadershiptrailmix.com. It's always awesome to hear from you. Also, if you can think of someone who needs to hear this content, please send it their way. This is the best way to support this podcast. Thank you for listening. Take care and talk soon.